Hi, everyone. It's Richard here.
Hello, it's Mary, and we are delighted to be back in Europe after many long years. And so it's wonderful to have people we love having people who typically come to these talks, but we're very, very happy to be here with some new faces and people we know also who are in Europe who don't normally are normally sensible and sleeping while we do the talk. So welcome.
It's nice that they're recorded. And that's
Yeah. We should listen to them every now and then. Anyway, we should behave.
Okay. Get serious.
Yeah, get serious.
Okay. So what are we talking about?
So tonight, our talk is on fear as it appears and disappears in waves of emotion. That's the main topic, but we wanted to kind of look at what we mean by fear and what fear is, because we're in a time in this troubled world where fear is used as a tool in a way. I mean, it always has been. People like to exert power, etc., by using fear, and we'll talk about what happens with that. But particularly at this time in history, there are some very real fears that people are facing and some real dangers, as well as other people who are taking advantage of the idea that fear can sort of manipulate other beings.
Yeah. And then when they do that, then you're not actually fearing, well, you're fearing them rather than paying attention to other dangerous things.
It's like a magic trick where where someone has sleight of hand and you think they're doing something over here when in fact
you're doing something.
They're doing something over there. And so it's a very timely topic to look at what fear is, how it impacts us, and how in these times, as well as any time, we can sort of find a way through and beyond fear. And with yoga, one of the things that people often think is, oh, well, I'm just going to do yoga and everything will be blissful. And then, and that could apply to the idea of fear and emotions. But that's not what we're suggesting, because really, in fact, yoga is not something that pulls you away from the reality of what is going on around you or within you, but it's something that is used in a big way to bring you into the present moment, to face what's actually going on.
Yeah, to wake you up to the
Yeah.
depth and also the endlessness of what's going on.
Yeah.
Although you could use yoga to escape.
And many do.
Yeah.
I have at times.
Yeah, I think we all have at times.
We all have.
And that's normal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you look at fear, if you look it up in the dictionary or you think of the way that it's talked about psychologically or even in pop culture, it really is described often as an emotional response. That's an emotional response to something that's perceived as a danger or something that's, harmful or painful. And that's sort of like the dictionary type response for what it is. And that's a decent definition of it. But from the yogic perspective, you could add more to that, where emotions are one part of the embodied experience. And emotions are sort of our cues to ourselves, and when we express the emotions, they're cues to other people that things are not quite right, that there's some imbalance going on. And in the embodied yogic sense, fear could be really defined as something that is experienced in the physical body as well as in the emotions, as well as in the mind.
As well as in the sensation of the breath.
The breath.
And so they're all interwoven. So emotion is...
It's a good part of it and a big part of it, but it's not really the whole picture.
Yeah. But because it's so interwoven with, the actual physical body and the actual sensation patterns, that gives you a way, well, perhaps there's a way of seeing through emotion, not avoiding it, but seeing it
more beyond
clearly.
it. Yeah.
So that you're not totally fearful of everything.
And when you think of fear as the embodied experience of it, and just think about a situation, not necessarily a dire situation that you've been in, but just even riding on your bicycle or driving down the street in your car, and there's a near miss, and imagine that, and then track within your body, what is it that you physically feel? Like what, is it a prickliness? Is there heat? Is there palpitations of the heart? Does your vision get more, precise or less precise right at the moment of the danger, and then afterwards when you are perceiving the fear?
Do you stop your own breath, or do you pant?
Yeah.
Or scream.
Yeah. But what you notice, if you pay attention to that, and really, truly, just think of some small situation that might have arisen for you, or a big situation, that there are phases within the perception of fear. There are phases where it is very extreme. There are phases at the very beginning where suddenly, you were in a state of partial or complete equanimity, and something happened which pulls you out of that state. And then in the body, there is this response that is, the one to save you from that. And so it's really, really, really valuable to, when you are not feeling fearful, when you are not feeling that you are in danger, to be able to think back to times, and I keep saying not the worst times, because that goes into a whole nother realm we'll hopefully talk about at the end, but just like a simple fear that might have arisen, to remind yourself, oh, that's what typically my body, this, sort of apparatus, this movement apparatus, as our friend Lenny would say, that's how it perceives and tells me, oh, something's amiss here.
Yeah, and so you develop a habit of noticing more about your body when a crisis occurs.
Yeah.
So you start with little tiny crises like we have.
When the internet wouldn't work earlier.
Yeah.
I remember that when I was sweating.
Yeah. And then you develop it, and the mind is so habitual, then you start, you start to notice more. And sometimes, when something really dangerous occurs, you're not really fearful for, some time, a few seconds or even a few minutes after it occurs. And then you're kind of, oh no.
Which, goes right into the thing all of you've heard of the response to danger, because we're saying that fear is a response to danger, or the fear or the anticipation of harm or hurt, pain. There's the typical responses that are, you fight against it, or you run away from it, or you freeze. And those are part of what happened, but it goes much more deeply when you start having done yoga. You can see, I am fighting when I run into fear. And what does that feel like in juxtaposition to the initial perception that something was wrong? And how do they both help or harm each other? Because one of the things that typically happens when we become fearful is, number one, that our perception can become very skewed, or our preconceptions about all kinds of things can take place and take over. And so, and we can start to doubt ourselves. We can start to really question that we're perceiving things properly, or we think we perceive them 100% properly and there's no other way of looking at it. And so these are all the wave patterns that, you could call them emotional responses, but they're also embodied physical responses, breath patterns, the prana patterns that manifest. And then you can start to see them as part of your, part of what you have as tools to tell you where you are in the day, where you are in interactions with the world. And we go into fear, the idea of danger, pain, or something that's harmful. Those are things that are important that we do respond to. But when you break that down, very often it's a fear of something that is going to disrupt your identification of who you are as yourself. And so it can be fear of losing something that you have, which could be anything from fear of, losing your health, or losing your spouse or your loved one, but also something simple like losing your job, or losing your way.
Losing your phone.
Losing your phone, that's even worse than losing your job. Of course, I've never had a job other than yoga, and does yoga count as a job?
We try to turn it into to run with. Yeah, there's this, one of the afflictions, the kleshas, besides, starting with ignorance and then ego and then attachment and aversion, is abhinivesha, which is kind of a reflexive, biological, built-in fear for the organism and the things you identify as you. And so it's just it's a reaction that's embodied. And it isn't always, and so if you can somehow redefine what you think you actually are, then you're probably enlightened or free of fear.
Yeah.
And I call it fear of yoga, because as soon as you start to feel, the possibility that things are actually pretty nice, even in the presence of the truth of impermanence, we all know theoretically everything is impermanent. Is that bad? And so as soon as you get almost in an accident, or you see somebody else, there's a physical reaction, and that's really and hopefully that's it's just something that you have a reaction, and then you can really see all of the sensations and then the other thoughts kind of fizzing up in this kind of web of patterns.
And so we were talking too about, you have all of this, like the fear of losing something that you have is kind of what we were talking about. And that's part of this identification with self. And then these fears can be real or they can be imaginary. And more imaginary things are fear of not getting what you do want. In other words, something you don't even have, imagining that you do want it, and then the fear that you're going to lose it, or that so the fear that takes you to the step that, oh, you imagine you have it, but now you can't even get there. So that those two in particular, those kinds of fear, are deep-seated, and they are also superficial. So they are superficial in the sense that they are more, in a sense, tangible, related to tangible objects and things outside of yourself. But they are extreme roots of fear for many of us. And then you also have the fear of any kind of danger or pain, which again can be very real or imaginary. And even we were thinking, speaking in Europe, where there is, we live in America, which is a place where there's another kind of fear going on, which is just sort of overwhelming. But in Europe, there are these, conflicts in Palestine and Israel that is going on, and near Europe, and in Europe with Ukraine and Russia, this going on, and the dangers that are real that are there, and the individual harm that can be.
Yeah, the suffering.
The suffering.
Is.
And so those are both real, but in any given moment, there could be a breath of fresh air, which is one of the things that is sometimes possible to find, and at other times not possible.
And so another is, and this is something when we all think, is it a real fear or is it imagined?
Mm-hmm.
But you have to use the imagination even in a situation of real fear. In other words, imaging.
Yeah.
And so that's one of those, like most words, you can have a really wide meaning that, or if you narrow the meaning down. And so I say, oh, that's not an imaginary fear that I'm sick, but you have to image it.
Yeah.
And that causes easy confusion.
Yeah.
And
so in a sense, the word imaginary fear is, it's a way of avoiding the truth that there is imbalance. Mm-hmm. The root of fear is imbalance. And if someone says, oh, that's just all in your head, that's, or if you say that to yourself, that's not really acknowledging the embodied experience that's going on.
So it's often not helpful because it's just saying, oh, you're misbehaving by thinking that that's real, ha, ha, ha.
Yeah.
And you can say that about any catastrophe. Oh, it's not, it's all, ultimately, there's nothing permanent there in the first place, so what's your problem?
Yeah.
And like in the Gita?
Yeah.
Or,
and that's the big one, is the fear of the unknown, and the fear of someone saying to you, something like, it's all impermanent, which then throws everything into this realm of not knowing, which is a huge source of fear, is that you don't know. And that is, like, the impermanence and the not knowing is so fundamental to the Gita.
Yeah, because, the Gita starts out, just before a huge battle between two armies that are actually two different sections of one bigger family. Just like, any war is like that. And if hopefully people will discover, that it's one big family. And there's, of course, the bad guy who's a psychopath, and then there are the good guys. And Arjuna, the hero, he starts to, before this battle, everyone is all pumped up, in their military, aggressive phase.
Yeah.
And they start blowing conch shells, which will make your body vibrate. So if you want to stimulate certain senses, blow a conch shell, or if you want to do it to somebody else, and make them worried. Blow a conch shell outside their house, but they blow all the conch shells, and people start. A lot of them start trembling. The soldiers on both sides, and Arjuna, who's essentially, he's the hero of the Gita, and his charioteer Krishna, who happens to be the supreme being. He says, "Oh, can we drive up between the two armies?" Because he's up the middle path between two armies, because he sees that there's an interweaving of these two sides that are about to fight. And he starts to see on both sides people he knows, and he understands the complexity. And he also understands that if the one side doesn't fight and they just surrender to the psychopath, that probably more people will end up dying and suffering than if they fight the crazy guy and maybe win. So he's very confused, and he just starts to look down, and all of a sudden he becomes extremely fearful, which for him is unheard of, because he's really the most buff and of heroic warriors. He's very famous. And so, he just and they make a point that his posture collapses, he just slumps over, which you can't even imagine him slump, and he drops his bow from his hands, which is symbolic, and he says, "I can't fight," and he just starts to weep. And his friend Krishna, who's the great teacher, and he says, "What should I do?" And Krishna looks at him and kind of smiles, which is kind of irritating to the reader, because they're very empathetic. And the smile is, and he says to Arjuna, a wise person never grieves for the living or for the dead. And he tells him, something that's very true, because, if you really understand impermanence, but it doesn't answer Arjuna's main question, which is, what should I do? Should I fight or not fight, or should I, what can we do to? And Krishna goes on to teach him, all of these teachings of Sankhya, where, the true being never changes and it's never injured. And so what's your problem? And it's kind of like a whole teachings of things that are very true, but
not helpful.
Yeah, Krishna does it with this funny smile on his face, which is designed also to make the reader a little bit like, come on, you know. And the whole beginning of the book goes on like that.
And as we were talking about earlier, what happens when you're fearful, and it happened to Arjuna, is your perception goes askew. You don't necessarily know whether you're going to take the right action or not. You have fear of not knowing what is going to happen, or not knowing what's going to happen if you take such and such an action. When in fact, if you are calm, and if you have been through life a little bit, you realize that truly you never really know. There is no such thing as knowing for certain exactly what's going to happen anytime. Just sit down on a meditation cushion and meditate for a minute and a half with all the great intention to keep your mind on the breath, and who knows what's going to come. Yeah. The waves come.
Yeah, even if you're a so-called experienced meditator, something could come up from deep inside your body, some amazing story, and what are you going to do? And the funny thing is that in the Gita, Krishna never, through the whole book, he teaches yoga to him, teaches Sankhya, teaches Buddhi yoga, the yoga of pure intelligence, teaches him bhakti, teaches him all kinds of sacrifices and things, and teaches them about all these, how to see, reality. And, it's a lot of beautiful teachings. But he's still, by the very end of the book, he says, and you want to see, me or the supreme, the beloved being in all persons, and then you want to act with kindness. He teaches him all of these good things, but he never tells him. And then he tells Arjuna, well, now that I've told you this, you should do what you want to do. But he never tells him what to do in relation to his situation.
And consistently, and this is why it's one of the reasons that the Gita is such an amazing text, is that, Arjuna gets all of these teachings, he starts to get them, and then at the very end of each teaching, he says, okay, and then what precisely is better, this or that? He always wants to know tell me with certainty.
What's going on?
What is going on? And so one of the pure teachings is that it is impossible to have certainty in the way that he wants to have certainty, which is this or that, a divisiveness.
Yeah, a formulaic certainty. Even, is there a God or is there not a God? Well, then if you read carefully the text, well, what do you mean by that word? Or if you're Buddhist, it's all impermanent or it's all empty. And so your mind makes a kind of a picture of what emptiness is. And then, what do you mean by that? Or even your definitions of Brahman or, in any religion. If you haven't had the direct experience, you don't feel the radiance, you don't feel the love or the wisdom or the awakening. How do you do that?
Yeah.
And so he teaches, well, just look. And so it's basically, look, Arjuna, just observe this. And in the looking, you'll find the great love that everything is. And he tells him all different ways to do it. But still, it's up to Arjuna. And you can be helpful to help others to do it, but still they have to do it at a certain point.
And so they're really with fear, with many of these teachings, we get trapped by this desire for a formula that will take us off the hook, that will make it so that we really don't have to be the ones where the buck stops with us, that we have a formula or a particular technique that is going to get us out of this tight spot. And with fear, when we have constricted, when the body has constricted, when the mind has constricted in the way that it does when you feel fearful, you become more and more rigid in that way. And so in a sense, I would think that what Krishna was doing was trying over and over to loosen Arjuna up, to calm him down.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. And so he, gets him to pay attention. Mm-hmm. And so the idea is that if you really pause and pay attention, even, as best you can in the situation, if you're in a situation of actual immediate danger, you might have to run for it or jump somewhere or run and help somebody. And you should do that, although you're never quite sure, well, what would be the absolute best thing to do in this case? You gotta, and sometimes the best thing to do is don't move. Mm-hmm. If there's a tiger prowling around your house, don't move, don't, or sometimes it's better just to run as fast as you can, or and you don't know for sure, but based on all of your wisdom to date, you do something. And the question then is, you have to be able to see this process going on as best you can. Even in a moment of crisis, it's possible, at certain moments in it, to watch your own mind and to watch your own sensations, or to watch your own breathing. And you can improve your skill, your ability to do that through practice. And so I was thinking that a lot of times in the practices we do, we're really almost training ourselves for, difficult situations, as well as wonderful situations.
Sometimes wonderful situations happen.
Sometimes amazing things happen. The weather is good,
The car starts.
The car starts, a politician makes a good, wise choice, and we feel that link. And so it's the ability to focus the mind on what's going on. And so I'm thinking of a couple of things that there's a famous chant, and this chant is, I think it's in the fourth chapter of the Gita, and probably many of you know, if you're Orthodox Brahmins anyway. Brahmarpanam Brahmahavir Brahmagno Brahmanahutam Brahmaivatena Gandhavyam Brahma Karma Samadhina. And so it's actually a book about practices, and comparing all the practices you make to sacrifice. And so the metaphor is sacrificing or giving up something precious into the fire, and it could be the fire of reality, it could be the fire of the breath, and
it could be the fire of fear.
It could be the fire of fear, the fire of sensations in the body. It could be, the patterns of fear, but it's making you look at them very closely. And so the arpanam is actually the little thing that you use to offer something. It's like the tool you're using. All of a sudden, that is considered extremely sacred. Or it's considered the stuff that you're starting to offer into the fire. Or, more commonly, it's the fire itself. That's the sacred fire, Agni, who happens to be burning the entire universe up at the moment. But you say, and so it's a way of reframing, of looking again at these things as deep processes. And so you start to see that in different practices, one thing is what's being sacrificed, and then the next practice, what was being sacrificed is then what everything's being sacrificed in. So all of them are looked at as being sacred, meaning look again, this thing is really totally amazing if you look at it.
And they're sacred and they're interpenetrating.
Yeah.
Profoundly.
Yeah. And so it's right after that, they start talking about sensation. You offer your breath into this, you offer sensation into this. So you start to feel sensation as being the fire that's sacred. And then I remember that a few verses down, then they say you should offer prana into apana, apana into prana, which is something.
You were so happy with
Yeah, I mean that
that's
verse.
your thing.
Yeah, and so that's the pattern of the in-breath should be sacrificed to its beloved, which is the pattern of the out-breath. And these are actually sensation patterns through the entire body. But you discover and so one is the sacred being offered, and then you flip it. And you do that with all these different things, and you start to not only do you feel what's going on, but you start to see that your formulations of it are also not you. That your understanding of the political situation though it might have a few faults because you don't know the entire history of everything, you start to see, but it's amazing. Even your partial understanding is sacred. And then you start to see, well, the mind is sacred. And you start to go, and you just start to kind of stumble into this feeling of like love or joy or bliss or wisdom. And whatever you call it, you got to always say, I also mean wisdom, because I say love, and you think, oh, okay, and then, and that's why it's kind of an interesting teaching, and that's why it's nice when people, particularly in situations, communicate, because they start to see other ways, other traditions that kind of flip the language over, and then you start to actually experience others.
And at the same time, when you are confronted with fear, and an example we were thinking of earlier was the example of the existential fear that so many of us have realized, which is the endangered earth, our beloved earth, that is, that is this underlying sort of angst that is out there in the world today. And that level of fear, or some of the great fears that we talked about in battles or major conflicts, those can be completely overwhelming. Or personal traumas that happen where you have felt betrayed by other people, or you have felt really harmed by other people's actions. Those types of things can, in the beginning of this talk, we were talking about how fear is more than an emotion, that it is a full body experience, the physical body as well as the emotion and the mind, but also, as you're saying, an area where sometimes the heart gets so set aside from it all because you feel so damaged by the fear itself that it's almost as though the integrated, the synthesized self has exploded, and you're faced with these pieces, and how do you put them back together? And so what you're saying, one of the great things that can happen for any one of us is, and again, we would say don't start with the hardest, most difficult situation that you have, but imagining, and we'll do the chant at the end of this, but imagining that the fire that you're sacrificing everything into is the fire that within you is fear. So you give and sacrifice into that fire, the tingling feeling in your, armpits that comes about after you almost die in a car wreck. You offer that in, or you offer in the lack of breath that you are able to work with because you have, constricted yourself in a place of pain or danger. And you start saying, is there any of this that I can offer into the fear itself to let it transform? Because if you look at any of those physical responses that we have, or the emotional responses, they too go in wave patterns.
Yeah. What do you mean by the fear itself?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and you think, do I mean the trembling of the body, the inability to breathe, or do I mean my
perception,
my imagination of, like a parched earth, or a friend who's suffering or dying or dead, what, and see, you have this interconnected web. And we always forget how all of those thoughts are completely interwoven with deep body sensation patterns, all of them, even your most profound abstract thought, but then thoughts that really are interesting to you, either in the good sense or bad sense, they really are embodied as samskaras, fascial patterns in the body. And so this is also like, there's a way of like maybe getting some, I don't want to use breathing space, but that's space. And then actually maybe you can do something. It's not like you're going to eliminate the truth of impermanence, but you can eliminate the suffering that the presence of impermanence causes.
Or at the very least, reduce it.
Reduce it, yeah.
You may not be able to eliminate it.
Yeah, you might be able to shrink it.
Yeah.
So the metaphor is you have this huge ocean, and then you practice and practice, and the ocean is still there, the water, but you could jump over it on a good day.
Step over it. Yeah.
Step over it.
And so one of the real problems that happens with fear, when you see it out of the context of a bigger picture, that it is part of a wave pattern of change outside of yourself, whatever it was that caused the danger to be there. It's also part of a wave pattern of response within you. And when you lose sight of that, you're then really frozen in time, and you're frozen within your own body, and you cannot pull together the parts of yourself that had sort of felt like they exploded. And one thing that people often feel when they have fear and then have been either, abused in some way or harmed in some way, and therefore feel fearful of being around others or have been in a dangerous, life-threatening situation. There's a fear of being around others because there is this disconnect and a doubt that you really do within yourself have human nature, the capacity and the intrinsic goodness that is the tenderness of heart that we all really have when we pause and drop into a feeling of more integrated self rather than fractured self. And so when we feel integrated, it's possible to really feel this sense of tenderness that is a seed of truth, a seed of compassion that lives within each of us. But if we've been really harmed, it can feel as though that has gone away. Because, and that feeling that it has gone away is one where we have, for whatever reason, because of the damage that has been done to us or the fear that has arisen in us, we have separated ourselves out, probably for a good reason, because we had to in order to survive.
Yeah.
And so...
to the point even of schizophrenia.
Yeah.
Or just you're traumatized
and you're stuck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking.
Yeah.
That, how nice it would be to be able to help somebody.
Yeah.
If they, they're, and then at a certain point, they can wake up and ultimately help themselves, whoever that is, through the paradox of wanting to help others.
Yeah. And the real, sort of delicate part to this is that, to within oneself, to not doubt the experience that you're having, but then to not over accentuate it. So how do you play that balance? How do you find the fact that yes, something has made me have fear, And yes, it's a real situation, even if no one else wants to talk about it or no one else sees it as that. Because you are experiencing it, by definition, it is real. And therefore, by knowing your responses to fear, that, your breath shortens, your heart palpitates, etc., you can begin to say, well, what can I do to calm the nervous system enough and to smooth out these patterns of being dysregulated to the point that I can begin to see more clearly and begin to do what I need to do to take care of myself, and eventually to interface and take care of others. Yeah. And it starts with tuning into one's own physical bodily experience and turning towards the fear itself and towards not necessarily the danger, but the fear. And then getting grounded and watching the wave patterns of the fear. Knowing also that there are many situations where we can't do it alone, where we have to, and it is important to, reach out and rely on others, or even if you can't reach out, accept the help of others rather than isolate more and more
and more,
and more, which is what very often happens with fear.
Yeah. I was just thinking of the teachings of Bodhisattva way, that, so a Bodhisattva is someone who decides that they want to help everybody, and then as they practice, they also see that they have these deep demons inside. Mm-hmm. And whether the demons are real or not, they have to do it. But they have to deal with, their own their own potentials to be as bad as anybody. Yeah. Could be, But as they start to see more deeply their own situation and the situation of others, they go, what can I actually do? Mm-hmm. And probably most of us won't be in a position where we become world leaders. Apparently it's a lot of work. You got to have a lot of help, from certain groups of people. But you can actually have some influence, And so one of the teachings that the Dalai Lama has made very clear, if you can just, if you get one person to feel better and to
begin to wake up a little.
To wake up and to be, compassionate and helpful, that one person might go and meet somebody else. And he was saying that his vision is that, if you help, say, 10 people, throughout, and each of those 10 people goes out, and they, just through contact and sincerity, it's not necessarily they have, all of these tricks and skills, but they communicate and touch 10 other people, and each of those people, and so mathematically it spreads out pretty quickly. Where you've got a lot of people, and it might not appear in the news or on social media because it's not that kind of thing. And so that's the.
And I guess that is a way of looking at, how really we are so interconnected with one another, and one finds whatever technique, whatever method works for oneself to be in the state of fear, turn towards it, and calm the nervous system down through practice, through running around, bouncing up and down, through chanting, through anything that doesn't take you away from it. So it's not like going out and drinking to take you away from it, or going out and pretending everything's good. It's to face it for what it is. And then to allow yourself, there's this thing we do, all of us do it sometimes, but especially when you're with people who are in difficult situations or dying, where you bear witness, where you do not inject your theories or your ideas, but you allow that person to express themselves. And they may not want to even say anything or do anything, but that's perfectly fine with you as well. You provide presence so that they feel there is a nest within which they can take a breath and really have the safety of others to face whatever it is that they feel comes up that needs to face. No agenda whatsoever. And so this idea of bearing witness for others, but also for oneself, like really saying, wow, let me really bear witness to the fact that this is a complex situation I'm in, and it's causing fear. And in that kind of situation, sometimes, be asking for someone you trust and someone you will not try to impose anything on you, to just be there, to bear witness, is a method for beginning to unravel or unlock the puzzle that you can get stuck in when you feel fearful. Because you can't be in a situation of dire fear and then just have someone say to you, just,
grow
up and just be compassionate towards others. That may or may not be appropriate. What you have to do is get grounded in your body and look for that sense of tenderness that you have that is inherent in being human. And that feeling of tenderness of heart, which is something that is when you see like a little tiny baby or a little kitten, we often use those examples.
I was just thinking of if you have a sick puppy.
Yeah.
And you just want
to
hold them,
Yeah. And that feeling of taking care, whatever you can do to generate that feeling within yourself, because it can get sort of pushed aside with fear and doubt, the doubt that comes from fear, the doubt that you're doing things correctly or that there's any way out of it. Cultivating that sense of tenderness inside that is really a reflection of the good heart, that is who humans are, even the ones who are highly confused. Deep inside, that's human nature, is that we come into the world with a good heart. Many people believe. I tend to believe that. You're a little more skeptical about that. So it's really looking again, and taking it slowly when you run into fear. Not trying to change the situation, which is the bearing witness thing. We were looking at different quotes and things, and I thought of the quote, in Europe it might not be as famous, but in the United States it's the only thing to fear is fear itself, which actually was said by Franklin Delano Roosevelt in his inauguration speech as President of the United States in the early 1930s, where the Depression and the economy had totally collapsed and people were just in dire states. And when we can recognize that there can be a path through, that you can find support to get through, just like Arjuna found Krishna. And that Krishna's final message being, I hand it back to you. You have this strength. You have this insight.
Yeah. And his final, he says, give up all dharmas and just take shelter, which is, he uses a Buddhist term, take refuge. And dharmas mean, different religions are called dharmas, that's all dharma, but it's also all kinds of theories and systems. So some that are, profound, and others that are just, useful. But it's like a cloud, and these things are just like, it's just like the human mind, or not mind. I don't, to call it human mind is kind of
egocentric.
Yeah, human-centric,
Yeah,
which is part of the problem, I think there might be better minds out there swimming in the sea, but to see it, and the seeing of it is the letting go of it, to see that it's, wow, it's just this wonder.
So it takes patience, and it takes community. It takes communication.
Yeah,
and
it takes work.
Yeah. That's why we practice.
Yeah. It's going to take work.
It's going to take work.
Karma. Okay. But the work is, so that one verse that we did, the end of it is Brahma Karma, the Brahman, which is being treated in that text as the unspeakable, ununderstandable, absolute nature, the truth. Samadhi, that they actually are the same thing, that actual action, which is, and things are in movement, so that's also karma, our work. So it's not necessarily, you gotta knuckle down and do some work, although that is included in that teaching, but it is action, which is change.
So finding what you can do to calm your nervous system, and yoga is great for that, chanting is great for that, which is part of yoga. And doing what you can do to regain a sense of belief that maybe you're not separate. We don't want to emphasize that, but that you're okay as you are. Because that's what's disturbed so often by fear, is that you are a human who's come here with an important role to play. And how do you want to spend your life? Asking yourself, do I want to spend my life in a state of fear and confusion and doubt? Or do I want to spend my life in a more equanimous state, or a more peaceful state, and do what I can to contribute, to serve in the best ways I can? And you're welcome to choose, I want to stay in a state of fear. But I hope you don't.
I'll choose suffering.
I'll choose suffering. Sometimes I think we do, but...
Yeah, it's not as scary. No, wait a second. It's fear that's the problem.
Yeah.
And so...
Suffering is more known, is more certain than not suffering. Not suffering tends to have an element of uncertainty to it. That's a whole nother topic.
Yeah.
Maybe we should chant that chant at the end. And then...
If you'd like, yeah. Okay. So, I'll just chant it relatively
A
slowly.
couple times.
Choose the key. Brahmarpanam, Brahmahavir, Brahmagnau, Brahmanahutam, Brahmaivatena Gantavyam, Brahmakarma Samadhina. Brahmarpanam, Brahmahavir, Brahmagnau, Brahmanahutam, Brahmaivatena Gantavyam, Brahmakarma Samadhina. So that's one. Traditionally, you're supposed to chant that before you eat something. And another chant is the one to the 5 pranas, which will be a different thing, but these are the 5 patterns of prana that exist throughout the body and mind, that are all this exogenous radiance. And you're supposed to chant that before you eat. And I think that's just a skillful trick, because none of them actually are talking directly about food. But people, to do the correct practice, they'll chant it really fast and they'll actually memorize it. And then 20 years later, they'll say, I wonder what that means. And they'll maybe look into it. And so a lot of it is, of this practice is this kind of playing our own, nature too, so that we can become more useful. So,
and happier in the meantime.
And happier.
So, well, thank you for joining us.